I want to thank everybody for dialing in today and joining. We're glad to have you here. Look forward to sharing with you SPW over the next hour and a half. All right, I think we're at time. Let me go ahead and get started here. First, just welcome to everybody who's joined. I'm Scott Wallace, and I'll do some introductions here in a minute, but welcome to the Strategic Planning Workspace. Learn how to implement Strategic Planning Workspace to align your work to strategic roadmaps. So a little bit of housekeeping. There'll be time for Q&A in the presentation, during presentations. Please don't use chat. Use Q&A if you have questions. We have people online with us that can answer those questions during the session. And if we don't answer them during the session, at the end, we have a Q&A, and we'll try to answer those live. The session is recorded, and it will be shared on the ServiceNow community after the session. And also, if you would please, after the session ends, we hope you had a very good learning experience. And there's a short survey we'd like for you to take. So as always, in these presentations, we'll be talking about product, and we'll be discussing items that may be forward-looking. We may be making forward-looking statements that are based on our belief and assumptions and information that's currently available to us at the time of this presentation. So just as a note that we'll be talking about a few things, and so the safe harbor statement. Right? So I'll do a quick introduction. I'm Scott Wallace, Product Success Manager and Strategic Portfolio Management Organization. Been with ServiceNow for 7 years. Started actually implementing back in 2015 on ITBM at the time it was called, when first was introduced. So I've been working with the product for a long time. Been in product success since I joined ServiceNow, doing the same capabilities and sharing with customers. And Molly is on the call also. Molly's also a product success manager, same organization, strategic portfolio management. Been with Service a lot longer, been in ServiceNow for 12 years. I'm based in South Dakota. I'm based in Atlanta. So the two of us will be hosting today and answering questions and so forth, right? So let's first talk about what we're going to cover today, right? So I'll go over the agenda, and we'll talk about a challenge I have for you. We'll talk about the journey, right? So your journey being that we'll have some polls for you, some interesting polls to ask to kind of gauge your perspective on what you see. And then we'll talk about what's driving our strategy, what's driving our business strategy. We'll talk about some key concepts around SPM and SPW specifically. Then we have some demonstrations. We'll go through a lot of demonstrations of the product. We'll talk about leading practices, and of course, at the end, we'll have Q&A. So the challenge I have, and I kind of like to phrase it up at the beginning, is hopefully during these sessions, you'll have some learnings. And the learnings will be when you're finished, you're going to be able to kind of start your own path on deployment of SPW, right? So fundamentally, the goal is understand capabilities, what's required to deploy, and then how can you share with your own community and your stakeholders, the benefits of SPW? So we'll gauge ourselves at the end here if we meet this challenge. So this is now when we're going to step into some polls. And Molly, if you're on there, I guess we're ready to kick off the first poll. So the first poll is really about your digital transformation. Where do you see yourself in your digital transformation? Not started at all, we're doing, but it's going slow. 3 would be progressing kind of as planned. And a few, sometimes you see, progressing very well, and actually it's quantifiable and qualifiable, right? This is kind of the top level view of how you're moving the organization in a digital transformation way. So we're seeing good results here. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for participating in these polls too, because I always find them interesting and to see where the general consensus is. And I see the consensus starting to build here already. Yeah. All right, Molly, I think that's good on this one. So kind of as expected, a lot of people are just getting started, and it's going slower than expected. And I want to comment on that one. We have some that are, progressing well. Only a few that are really kind of in the advanced stage. But the starting and going slow, maybe SPW is going to help you understand how you can push that a little faster, right? That's one of the goals here, is to show you how you can use SPW to drive your digital transformation. All right, so we can move on to the next poll. So poll number 2, move to the next slide here. Poll number 2 is about your planning process, right? How automated is it? Is it automated? Is it somewhat automated? What does your general planning process look like, right? Because the goal here, of course, with SPW is to unify the execution layer and the planning layer and start to automate your planning process and improve it for efficiency. I'd love to see a bunch of 4s, but that's not common. But it's probably more common to say you have probably 2s and 3s in there. Or possibly, as I'm seeing here, some of the results say it's still pretty manual, which is for those who answered that would be a big opportunity to look at SPW for your planning. Because if today it's all manual and you're using projects and demands and epics or any combination of that, you have an opportunity to take on SPW to help you step out of manual. All right, that looks like a good end there, Molly. You can show the results on that one.
Can you see the results?
No, it says not yet. Oh, there it is. There it is. It's up now. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So poll number 2. Yes. So thank you. So there's the result. So a lot of a majority of people really are looking at manual process only. A few are moving. It's moving slowly, but there's some manual processes. Kind of as expected. No one is streamlined and automated yet, because that's a real mature organization to be able to accomplish that. And some have combined. So that's a good indication that we have an opportunity here today, which is probably why you're attending anyway. I would hope that you're going to learn how to deploy SPW and what it takes to manage it. Okay, final poll. Key one for us is, for poll number 3, is how is your work aligned, right, to your planning strategy? In other words, really in short, I guess the best way to say it is, are you aligning your work to business strategy, right? Because in using SPW, you can align it to goals. You can also use strategic planning too, top-down planning, but how is it aligned? Because that's a key driver for this, is not just being able to do road mapping, but do road mapping that's aligned to a business strategy. That's key. So how well is it aligned? Is it aligned? Is it visible? Can you share it? So that's kind of what this driver is here. Okay. Okay, you want to bring up results there on this last poll? So this is interesting too, in the final results here. So it's kind of expected some alignment. However, there's a lot of manual activity going on, right? As an example, quite often there's some planning going on, but you send everything out to another system, or you push it to PowerPoint or something like that. So big opportunity here to show you how to do alignment, because there's a couple demonstrations will show you how to align to goals and strategic planning. So thank you, Molly, for the polls. All right, let's move on to what's driving our business strategy and SPM in general, and in driving into SPW. So what is this driving this? So the key trends that are driving our strategy, one is alignment, as I mentioned here, alignment to business strategy. So it's really an effort to look at all work and align that work to a strategy. So the execution layer at the bottom, all the way to the very top, on what is the business strategy, what are the business drivers, define that strategy and link the work. That way you can tell what % of alignment and where you're out of aligned. And then the question becomes, what work are you doing that's not aligned, and why is it, why are you working on it, right? The second one is agility, is replanning. A lot of replanning has to happen, right? So you need a very dynamic capability, right, that enables flexible planning architecture for business agility. And that's really what it is a flexible architecture. And that's really what SPW can offer to you. And the bottom right, simplify the user experience to drive adoption and intelligent insights. And there's some capabilities are coming in future in the product that will give a lot of insights into activity in SPW. We'll drive some activity to point things out. And there's some AI coming too, of course. We've talked a lot about that recently. Right? So this is what's driving our strategy at the macro level. I asked earlier about your digital transformation journey and what that's about. And I asked because where are you along the journey? If you look at phase 1, 2, and 3, a lot of customers are excited about it. And then you get into the, say, 4, 5, and 6. And that's the struggle. It's a lot of cycles, a lot of activity, a lot of business change, a lot of organizational change, or OCM type activity, right? So when you see this, it's like, well, how do we move and innovate? And if you look at the plan, build, operate, service kind of cycle, SPW really is in the plan phase. So we want to be able to take and innovate. We want to be able to build roadmaps. We want to understand how to look at execution of activity. Of course, replanning activity, right? Being agile. And we also have to be able to do and evaluate. How are we doing? How are we tracking, right? So that's the driver on the digital transformation, is connecting to this cyclical activity, and we're in the plan phase there, right? So you look at the plan, right? Overall, right? This cycle of innovate, roadmaps, execute, reprioritize, replan, and is workspace, right? So strategic planning workspace. This workspace gives you the ability to bring all this activity together in a roadmap. Right? You'll see prioritization, you'll see goals, right? You'll see all this in the SPW application. So that's us answering the question of doing planning and understanding how to do planning. So then the big question becomes, how do I connect your business strategy to the critical work, to drive the business value out, right? How do you do that? Well, the first is, when you look at the overall alignment of strategy, alignment, and delivery. And the first is around the strategy. And that strategy is utilizing goals, strategic priorities, and roadmap planning to link up your work. So that's what the main first driver is. The second driver is aligning that work. This helps executives deliver outcomes by aligning and tracking investments across their portfolios. And the third layer is delivery. So no matter what tool you're using to deliver work, whether you're hybrid or waterfall or both, you can deliver work at the execution level, agile, safe, waterfall. And we have you covered. We have you covered at that execution layer. So Strategic Planning Workspace provides the visibility across strategic planning, execution of work, business priorities, portfolio roadmaps, enterprise and business unit goals. So this is how this gets connected. Let's talk about the drivers, the value drivers, right? The planning workspace helps drive visibility of all the work. And that's the bottoms up looking at all the execution work. Provides a method for prioritization of that work, which is we'll talk about in SPW. You see the prioritization area, which allows you to do alignment of all work to the business strategy. Right? So Strategic Planning Workspace is a value driver, in my opinion. It's a value driver for your business planning that your organization is really seeking to have. That's what SPW is built to do, is to align all this to your strategy. What are the objectives, right? So to me, it's real clear the objectives are be prepared to deliver your outcomes, provide planning teams with clear expectation and execution plans, ensure that their work is aligned to strategy, and provide real-time insights to those delivery teams. That's the objective of the planning. So this visual here, I want to make mention of it. It's what we call our capability map. This is out community, a couple other places, but I want to mention how SPW connects to this capability map. The first thing is strategic planning we address goals, portfolio, road mapping, et cetera, right? But we use the capabilities either in scaled agile or agile for epics, and we connect to projects and demands. So we're using those execution records to bring that information into strategic planning, right? And as a future, kind of a future statement, in the future, we'll be having capabilities brought into the application for scenario planning, capability planning, innovation, feedback, and financials, right? So we're continuing to expand and grow the SPW application. Let's take a look next. The May release, and then the just released May release. There's February and May. So an example of some improvements and enhancements, right? So we delivered Kanban, right? So you have Kanban-based roadmaps, you have hierarchy views, so you can see different structures, and you have multi-level planning, right? Which I'll show you next as an example. You have a way to do multi-level planning. So you have planning at the top, planning at the bottom. So at this top level planning, right? Because right now you think about it, everything comes in from an execution record and you got the planning layer. How do we do top-down planning? And that's with strategic investments. And you can create roadmaps using initiatives or strategic programs, or even you can show demand and project, right? But you can create a planning structure above the work and align that planning structure to goals. So depending on how you want to do it, you can link portfolio to goals, you can link anything to goals. But this is an example of strategic investments where you do a top-down planning besides a bottom-up. This is where you connect the two, right? So now I'll move on to some little bit more detail in what I consider kind of key concepts to understand and know about SPW. The first one's the roadmap, like the SPW application roadmap, not the product. But so we started a while back, right? February 22. So, a year and a half old here, right? So we've had the initial versions, which used to be called Alignment Planner. It's now called Strategic Planner and Portfolio Planner, right? So the major improvements were coming in Tokyo. And there's a lot of lenses showed up in Tokyo, new planning architecture, the goal framework showed up. February, we moved to strategic planning as a new name for the application, and I'll explain in a minute why we did that. And then there's portfolio planning, very similar, but just slightly different for licensing. And at that time in February, we introduced some new lenses and we had some product enhancements. And now we're at the May release, which is connected to Utah. Many of the features, by the way, are backwards compatible. They work in Tokyo forward, but we're at the Utah release. And you'll see we're in strategic planning, which is what we'll do demonstrations today. So 2.1, portfolio planning, 6.1. We added hierarchy views, the Kanban, and we have export to PowerPoint for the roadmap. Right, as I look a little forward, strategic planning, some of the capabilities, as I mentioned, will have capacity. I think capacity might show up in August, some capacity capabilities. And for November store release, we should see support for financials and an expansion of capacity because it'll be pretty new to the product. And then financial management. So there's a lot of enhancements and new capabilities for August and November. So that's the general high-level view of our roadmap. I mentioned the fact that recently we changed Alignment Planner to Strategic Planner and Portfolio Planning. So Strategic Planning, Portfolio Planning. The reason is distinction between what the capabilities are. So core capabilities for planning. That's for the customer who's just doing basic waterfall planning and doesn't need a lot of the enhanced capabilities that are found in Pro. So for instance, you might not need the ability to have a bunch of custom tables. You don't need the ability to do Kanban. You don't need to link to goals, things like that. But if you need that and you do planning at a layer where you're integrating hybrid work, you need some custom tables, possibly because you want your own tables to be brought into planning. You might be Kanban. You might be on a project to product journey. So you want product views, and you want goal views, et cetera. That's all in Pro. So this is a distinction really between the two, why they were separated, right? There's a view coming up here next that really kind of describes that. If you're a portfolio manager, think about yourself as a role. If you're just a portfolio manager, head of a department from an organization, it might be that project portfolio is good enough, right? Traditional waterfall planning, basic project lens. use out of the box portfolio lens and you're good to go. However, if you're strategic planning, you're an SRO, you want value stream, you're managing safe arts, you're a strategic office, program office, right? You're into product. So you're a product line manager, VP of product, something like that. You're going to want to use professional because it brings in all those capabilities. The lenses, support for the hybrid models. Okay. So this is quickly where you find the product. So key concept, it's in the store. And I want to just call out distinction of that because there are times when people don't realize that it's not always the family release, it's actually the store release. I believe in the store release now, this is pretty current. We have about 30, 31, I think it's maybe even up to 36 now applications under SPM that are in the store. I'm highlighting 3 here, the strategic planning, portfolio planning, and there's the original planning. So say, for instance, you were on San Diego, you still could take Alignment Planner Workspace. However, if you do, be sure you follow docs to do your upgrades. So when you're in the store, you'll notice like portfolio planning, it will say what version it is. And it will also say what the compatibility, sorry. So Utah and Tokyo, patch 8. All right, so same thing if you go to strategic, it'll say what version it is, the capability, capacity, give you all this information where to download it, right? So let's move on now to pre-designed lenses. So over the last year, we've now introduced actually 9 months or so, we've introduced a bunch of new lenses, which are really have enhanced the capability of the product in terms of visualizing and seeing your portfolio plans. So originally in February, we had portfolio, the value stream and goals. The original one back in November, so it is coming up on a year, we had organizational lens, strategic lens, and the product lens, right? And these link down to who would use it, to personas. This is a persona-based type of environment, right? So you look at the personas of portfolio manager, SROs, product line, value stream, right? These are the lenses you probably would start with when you want to build out your visuals for planning. So the next is under key concept is the integrations. And that's important to note, excuse me, that this application is using data from the core. It's using projects, it's using epics and features, right? So the planning application is using an internal integration to look at the demands, projects, epics, things like that. So there's an internal integration that syncs all this stuff up real time for it. But you'll need to know about that integration, right? And maybe a better visual to look at the integration is this visual here. These lenses are at the top. And this is how the lenses are structured to look at the planning items in the planning table. This is the alignment. So activity is being brought up from the execution tables into the alignment tables. And the data sits there and we use lenses on top of that to look at the structure. Right? So this is the architecture of it and how the lenses work and how you create the portfolio plans using the lens. And then you can navigate down to the planning items via the planning table. Another key concept too, in terms of the personas, right? So as we mentioned, there's different personas that would want to use SPW, which is key for your organization in terms of your stakeholders and who you can introduce the capabilities to SPW in terms of your internal adoption. So strategy, portfolio users, demand and project owners, right? These are all the different types of roles we would have. And these are also internally in terms of how the roles are set up and how people can use the application. Another key concept is to understand the planning states, right? So all the execution data is brought into the planning tables, right? Based on some filter criteria that you set up. So when you create the information, it brings it in, right? So that's on the integration. As it brings it all in, think about this like you do in the agile world. You're kind of grooming the backlog. You're understanding what's in it. You're managing that backlog. Things are coming in. Things are being prioritized. Things are being executed and they get completed. Same kind of concept in SPW. Right? New items show up. They're new. They've just been introduced. Right? It's the prioritized state that's key. Is when you move an item to prioritize, that's when it actually shows up on the roadmap view. And we'll get what's a demonstration of this later, right? So things could be in review, which is, hey, I'm reviewing them, but I don't want to put them on a roadmap officially yet. Canceled and done, right? So there's individual states within the planning items that determine where things show up. Okay, so with that, I want to move on to some demonstrations, right? So we're going to go through, let's go to the next slide here so you can kind of see the demonstration. So we're going to look at setup, right? And we're going to look at the lenses and kind of how the lenses work. We're going to look at a couple lenses, portfolio and strategic investments. Then we'll look at the prioritization. And the prioritization is that backlog area. We're going to look at the list, the Kanban, and we'll look at the hierarchy views. Then we're going to look at some navigation in the workspace, how to personalize, look at dependencies, look at milestones. And then we'll look at goals and targets. So the first couple of videos are really about how to do setup, right? And then we'll get into the experience. So the first video I'm going to run here is on finding a plugin.
There are 3 steps to installing the Strategic Planning plugin in your sub-production instance. Request the Strategic Planning application from the ServiceNow store. Receive the email approval for your request. Then install the Strategic Planning plugin in your sub-production instance. Open a browser and point it to the ServiceNow store. Search for the Strategic Planning application. Then click on the Strategic Planning tile. A web page will display the information about the Strategic Planning application. You will want to review the version details and the date of this store release. Select Get. You will be prompted for your ServiceNow ID and credentials. Once back on the Strategic Planning application information page, select View Requests. Enter your instance name only. Then enter a reason for the request. Now validate your instance. You will now see the Request button will become active if you've entered a valid instance. Click the Request button. A message telling you your request is auto-approved. Close this form and wait for an email confirmation. You will receive an email letting you know your request was approved and you can now install the Strategic Planning application in your sub-production instance. As a system administrator user in your sub-production instance, go to All, type Plugins, and select Plugins. When the plugin list displays, search for the Strategic Planning plugin. Review the Strategic Planning plugin for the version requested. Then click the Install button. Review the application dependencies and what will be installed. Only select the demo data if this is a sub-production instance. Then click Install. Wait for the plugin to successfully install. Once the plugin has successfully installed, close the plugin pop-up. Then refresh the instance, select All, type in Strategic Planning, and you will see the application modules in the navigation. You can also verify under Workspaces for the Strategic Planning Workspace.
All right, that was our first demonstration of where to go find the plugins, right? Let's now move on to guided setup. This is where we'll understand how, once the application is installed, there's a set of instructions of how to actually install and configure the application.
As a system administrator in your instance, select all, type strategic planning, select guided setup. The guided setup page contains information about getting started with configuring strategic planning. Click the Get Started button. This page contains detailed information about each step to be performed in order to set up and configure strategic planning. Let's take a closer look at the tasks that need to be completed to utilize the predefined lenses. Select Get Started. You will notice there are 3 tasks that need to be completed.
All right, so then getting the guided setup, you wouldn't take too much time to go through all that, but you can see there's step-by-step instructions of how to do your setup. All right, so let's move next on to roles. What are the roles required and what's needed to set up so your administrator can use it, your portfolio users, your demand project, etc. Anyone who wants to use SPW.
When we think about these strategic portfolio management's primary personas, we think about those personas who are responsible for setting the strategic priorities and goals, the personas that will align the product and the portfolio work to the strategic priorities and goals, the personas that will operationalize the work, and those that will view or work with the execution items, and finally, the persona that will be responsible for configuring the solution. We have 3 strategic planning access roles that match the primary persona: the SPW admin, the SPW user, and the SPW stakeholder. There are 3 goal framework for SPM access roles that we have matched to the primary personas: the goal administrator, user, and read-only roles. There are 3 best practice steps to granting access to the strategic planning application. First, create an access group. Second, grant roles to the group. And third, add members to the group that represent the persona. You will want to be logged in as a system administrator user. Select all, type groups, select groups under user administration. On the new group list, select new. On the new group form, populate the name of the group, SPW user, and then add a description and any other information as needed. Save the group record. Select the Roles tab and click Edit. Find the role you want to grant to this group. Select the SPW user role and then click Save. You will see a message that a job will run to add the selected roles to the group. Now let's add users to the group. Select the group member and click Edit. Find the group members you would like to add to the SPW user group. Move the users from the left container to the right. Once you have added all the members, click Save. You will again see a message. Save the group record, then review the group members and the roles, and click Update. Now let's test and make sure we have the correct roles granted to a group member. Select Impersonate User, type in Megan Burke, and click Impersonate User. Verify Megan can access Strategic Planning Workspace. Select Workspaces, Strategic Planning Workspace. Megan will see the portfolio plans that have been shared with her or that she has created.
Okay, so that was looking at roles. I mentioned that the next one is about integrations, and I mentioned earlier about the fact that you have execution items, projects, demands, and epics at core, and you have SPW as an application. There's an integration that connects the two. So let's go look at the integration.
Portfolio and Strategic Planning Workspace's integration application facilitates the ability to import, export, and manage planning items between the ServiceNow applications of PPM, Agile Development 2.0, and Scaled Agile Framework. Steps to manage the Portfolio and Strategic Workspace integration are creating a default mapping between the planning item tables and the execution item tables. Verify the table mappings. If you have custom fields on the execution tables, you will want to add them to the integration mapping. There is also a system property that will allow you to update and insert the execution items on the planning items after the initial mapping and import. You can also use Guided Setup to assist you with the Portfolio and Strategic Planning Workspace integration application setup. You will need to be logged in as an SPW user or an admin user. Select All, type in Strategic Planning, and select Integration. On the Alignment Integration list, select ServiceNow Internal. On the Alignment Integration form, you will see that the Table Maps tab will be empty. Select the related link, Generate Default Mapping Configuration. This will generate the integration mappings of the execution table to the alignment table. Depending on the other SPM applications installed, you may see less than 5 table maps. Review the table maps by clicking on each table list in the Table Map tab. On the Table Map form, in the Field Map list, you will see all the fields that have been mapped between the alignment table and the execution table. You will also see the flow type. The flow type represents the flow of data between the two tables. If the flow type is both, then that field, if changed either in the alignment table or the execution table, the flow will be synced bidirectional. If the flow type is execution to alignment, then the data will change from the execution table only to the alignment table. If you have custom fields on the execution table that you would like to integrate with the alignment table, then you will need to create a new mapping. For the initial import of data from the execution tables to the alignment tables, you will need to run the import function. After the initial import, the data will be synced per the flow type and in real time. To run the initial import, select the import button. You will be prompted to populate the import request. These dates represent the created date of the execution records. The from date would be the earliest created date. To date will default to today's created date. After you have populated the dates, select OK. A message will be displayed letting you know your import requests have been queued. Let's take a look at how the import requests are coming along. I like to personalize my view so I can see the status of the records process. I like to add the following columns: failed count, insert count, update count, and table count. When the requests for each execution table have been processed, the state changes to completed. In order to update the import requested related list, click on the breadcrumb to reload the list. We can now verify the data by viewing the planning items. Select all strategic planning items. In the planning item table, you will see that the data has been populated with the imported data requests.
All right, so there's a quick snapshot of the integration, and there's a lot happening in that integration too, right? So that's a key thing to note, is when you're doing your setup, that there's someone on your team who understands technically how to manage integrations and the data that comes in, right? So now let's go look at a lens. First lens, kind of the general, like what is a lens, right? So we'll talk about that first.
The lens structure defines the hierarchy of the lens, representing how an organization prioritizes, funds, and plans work. The lens structure consists of lens entities. Lens entities represent different levels of planning. The portfolio plan is a personalized focus of planned work, goals, and roadmap aligned with the strategic enterprise vision. Lenses were created to allow the visualization of work items to be aligned to multiple portfolio plans. Lenses help customers make the product shift without having to give up hierarchical views of planned work. By utilizing the ServiceNow platform capabilities, configurations are reduced and provides the ability to support planning and prioritization with the ServiceNow solutions. This is a conceptual diagram that shows you an overview of the tables that are used for the strategic and portfolio planning applications. You will see that the ServiceNow platform tables as well as the SPM tables are used as entities for the lens structure, and the SPM execution tables are synced with the planning tables in order to render planning items on the portfolio plan. You will need to be logged in as a SPW user. Select all, then type strategic planning, then select lens. On the lens list, you will see the 6 predefined lenses. We will select the organization lens. The organization lens form has detailed information about the org lens, the description, the available planning items, and the lens structure. The bottom entity on the planning item attribute represents the last leaf node of the lens structure. This attribute ties the planning items to the lens.
Okay, so now you've kind of seen the structure of how a lens looks at the information is in the planning tables, right? So let's go look at an example of the first lens, which would be the portfolio lens. There's many lenses, but as an example, and that's the lens I used when I created the information for the HR portfolio, which we'll see in prioritization and workspace section.
Let's take a closer look at the project portfolio lens, which is included with the SPM standard license. Project portfolio lens was designed to enable customers who are already using portfolio tables to take advantage of the lens functionality. By default, this lens groups planning items like demands and projects into portfolios. If the Scaled Agile Framework Professional application is installed, Safe Epics can also utilize this project portfolio lens. You will need to be logged in as a SPW admin user. Select all, then strategic planning, then lenses. On the lens list, select project portfolio. The project portfolio lens form will display the detailed information about the lens, the description, the available planning items, and the lens structure. The available planning items represents the type of work that can be planned using this lens. Move the desired planning item from the available to the selected. The Epic is showing as an available because I have the Safe Portfolio plugin installed. The bottom entity on the planning item attribute represents the last leaf node of the lens structure. This attribute ties the planning item to the lens. Let's save this lens and take a look at the workspace's Strategic Planning Workspace and see the lens that's available for us to create a portfolio plan. You can see the project portfolio lens is available with the planning items of demand, project, and epic. In another video, we will walk through creating a project portfolio plan.
Okay, so the next one is the strategic investment. So this is an example of using high-level planning, right? So we're gonna see how that structure versus, say, an organizational structure.
Let's take a closer look at the project portfolio lens, which is included with the SPM standard license. Project portfolio lens was designed to enable customers who are...
So I hit the wrong one. I apologize there. Let's try that again. unless I missed the video here.
Now let's take a look at the...
Yeah, it looks like I apologize for that. I have the wrong video in there. So my mistake here. I missed that one. So apologize for that. But anyway, the strategic investment lens, and I'll show you this a little bit later here in prioritization, you'll get to see all these lenses. The strategic is allowing you to set up the programs, initiatives, and strategic programs to do top level planning. So let's go on to now the actual, besides this setup, let's go on to the user experience, right? So what does the user experience look like? So as a user, once the setup's done, the integrations are tested, and you've kind of gone through a whole testing cycle and all that, what does it look like as a user? So the first one we'll take a look at is the list in prioritization. But before I get into that, what I want to mention is I built out the demonstration here using the portfolio lens for the organization HR. So it is an HR portfolio that I'm using. So when I talk about the portfolio, it's like the setup is using that lens. So I'm picking the HR portfolio. However, inside that, you'll also be able to see a view of company, a view of an exec organization, a view of strategic investments, a view of products, a view of goals, and a view of a value stream, right? And that's what we set up. So I kind of want to explain the structure before I kind of go into a demonstration of it, right? So what did I frame up and say, hey, I want to create an HR portfolio roadmap, right? The goal of it is to optimize HR portfolio by delivering and aligning all work, business strategy and portfolio goals, right? Pretty basic. The roadmap itself is hybrid. So I'm using demands, projects, and epics. The date range, as you can see, is January 23 to December 24. The lens is portfolio by default, since that's what I selected when I created my lens. So I picked the portfolio lens and said, I'm going to create an HR roadmap using a portfolio lens. When I look at prioritization, how do we see that, right? So we'll use rank. We'll use rank to show what is in the roadmap view of the HR portfolio, right? Things that are in review are being considered for the roadmap, and things that are new, there's one at the bottom down there in the blue, that's not planned yet, right? So it's in the backlog effectively, but it's not even under review yet, right? So this is kind of a general structure of information, and a video will kind of show you what we did for that. Here's this first video. Okay, we'll start by showing how we create the portfolio. It's picked HR, pick the lens basically, right? Projects, demands, epics, have a little bit of filtering. This is what it looks like. Right, we set this, basically I'm just setting what it looks like. So now we're at the prioritization list here, and this will spend our time, right? So here's the date ranges I picked, and it's a portfolio HR, and it's using the portfolio project lens, right? And if, for instance, I wanted to share this out, here's how I share it out. I picked the person, I add a note. Depending on the role, if they have viewer or editor rights, depending on which one they have, I can grab those different rights. Right, so I've shared this out to somebody as I'm working on it. So you can share. The personalization here. These items are in the planning state of prioritization, review, and in review and new. I wanted to see the state next to planning because I want to compare. I want to see the planning state in planning, but I also want to know the state of the execution item. And you can reset these views too, of course, at any time. So now I have the actual execution item state, which is nice to see. You can auto-fit columns and drag and drop, of course. This is all drag and drop. But now I can see the different items, what they are, and their work in process, and they're being qualified. So I can look at demands that are on the roadmap that are qualified or submitted, or actually work in process, right? And new items, what the item is and what the state is. This helps kind of understand the execution item, the planning item, and how they're related. Let's pick one here that's red. Payroll automation. It's a project, work in process. Looks like we're getting close to the end of it, but it's red. It's high priority, but we're only 55% complete. So you're probably asking what's going on there. Right from here, I can tell. I can click on the item, I can click on the dots here, and I can go in and look at the project itself, or I can even go down and look at the most recent status report, which is what I'm doing here. It brings up the status report. If I had more history on it, it would bring the history of this over time and the details. So this is right out of the project. So I'm back to the item. As I start looking through these different items, I can decide what I want to do. I can actually click in the item itself, look at dependencies, look at relationships, can manage all this information right from here. Right? It looks as it's dependent on another item. So if this one's delayed or off schedule, it'll have impact to the other item. You can have conversations with people who own the items too. Here's another one. There's a demand here. Looks like it should have already started. It should have started in early June, but it's not. So it's not been converted. So what's going on? It says it looks like this demand is late. It should have started. It's been being pushed out. And we'll see that on the roadmap. It's an item that should have been converted. It's behind schedule. So that's why I have it listed as yellow. This is where you have a discussion with the demand manager, finding out when this can be converted if there's an issue. And you'll see it's right there. It's already behind schedule. So that's why I marked it as yellow. And you can see the financial numbers in there also because I have it on the roadmap as display information. So there's a new item that came in. Items in review, new items. So here's an item, I can look at what state it's in. I can look at dependencies and relationships, dependent items, dependent and dependent on, and also related items. Right? So you may have some of these things that are related that aren't dependent. This one's in review, scheduled to be executed. This is 2024. So this is an item that says, yes, we've all agreed to put it on the roadmap. I want to see it on the roadmap. So I'm going to go from in review and move it off to a planning state, right? So in review, I'm going to prioritize it. Now it will actually show up in the roadmap as a future item, 2024 item. And I'm also going to move it up. Since we made this change to say, hey, I want to include it in the roadmap, I'm going to move it up and I'm going to change the rank. Right? So it's a 2024 item, right? It's a demand that says, yes, we're going to do this in 2024. There it is. There's the two dependencies we saw, right? You can also have a new item down at the bottom if you look at the different items. Again, you can drag and drop any of these. You can decide that, look, how you want to do planning. So you can decide, I want to look at the individual item types, the execution types. You can say, no, I want to look at, depending on the planning state of the item, right? So I'm going to look at the planning state. You can also have these nested too. You can have them hierarchical. So I'm going to look at the planning state because I want to look at things that are new and how to respond, or maybe prioritization. And you can see the rank. Again, like we discussed before, you can see the rank of these items. And they're descending based on execution. And you can change this. So there's a lot of capabilities, a lot of features. I can actually go into the actual portfolio if I'm an owner of it, and I can attach items. Maybe there's a strategy around the portfolio. You can attach it, and it's part of what's being shared out to the groups. Comments, you can share comments back and forth as part of workflows. You can also from here determine if you want to do new, depending on your business process. You may decide at this point that that comes through a data innovation cycle, or you can do the cycle. So that brings me to the conclusion of this video, and thank you. All right, so that was the list view, so prioritization, right? So now let's move next to same concepts, kind of looking at the backlog, but we're going to look at it from a Kanban view. Now let's go look at Kanban. So we're back at the prioritization. We looked at list previously. Now let's go look at the Kanban view. You can see you can personalize the vertical lanes and swim lanes depending on what specifics that you need, like what specific activity or how you're tracking, right? So vertical and the swim lanes can all be adjusted. Here I have it defined by the state and priority. So I can find individual items that have been prioritized or in review or new and what the prioritization is. Here I'm collapsing the individual items and I'm looking at this one specifically. This is something that's in the new state. I want to understand what it is. I want to know about the item. Is it ready for review? Is this something we could look to put into the swim lane? So this has activity. You can see all the activity on it. You can look at the comments, notes. It's been approved to include it in the HR portfolio. So it's an item that's ready to be approved and looked at and into the portfolio. I can also go into the details here, right? And I can look at the individual details, like so the categorization, the portfolio, the departments, the product, the dates. I can look at change. I can look at the individual goals. I can look at the prioritization of it. It's in a planning state now, right? And again, as we see, it's been approved for the HR. There's financials in there, and there's also assessment data. So I can look at the details. I can obviously discuss and comment. So I'm kind of reviewing the data here to make sure that this is something that's filled out enough that it makes sense to include. It has a goal relationship, which is critical if you want to align to the strategy of the business. And it also has some milestones already added. So there's some items. These are individual milestones, planning milestones, right? As a planning item milestone, not specifically off the work schedule. And it's also have some related items. There's a dependency to the workflow, right? So there's an HR workflow. I can look at the dependency. I can understand what it looks like. This will eventually, of course, show up on the roadmap. When you hit the roadmap view, you'll see these dependencies show up, right? So this is project depends on, right? So you can see the comments, right? So at this point, I agree that it looks like it's ready to be under review. I can move it to the review state. So I can do all this activity right in the Kanban views. And also, you can also determine if you want to add project and epics. Thank you. All right, so that's the Kanban view. Now let's move on to the hierarchy view. And I first want to make mention of what the hierarchy view is. So in the prioritization, you have list, Kanban, and hierarchy. And we're going to hierarchy now. The key thing to know about hierarchy is you get the opportunity to see all of these additional hierarchy structures, right? So click through here. So remember we talked about, because remember I set this portfolio up using the portfolio lens. So I picked HR as the portfolio and I use portfolio lens. However, I'm able to see using the hierarchy view, all of the other related. So I can see goals. So if I'm an example, I'm a product owner, I can see the product, right? I can see value stream, et cetera, which is pretty powerful. You get a way to see a whole other dimension. Again, my structure is portfolio because that's how I want to operate, but I can now see how other users or other stakeholders or other colleagues might look at this information if they created their own lens, right? And it supports these portfolio owners, or I'm sorry, these personas below. So now let's go look at that, the hierarchy. And we've looked at list, Kanban, and now let's look at prioritization and the hierarchy view. So this is related items to the portfolio HR. So when you get to hierarchy, you're now combining the list forms and the Gantt forms, and you can actually adjust those. So here we can adjust, of course, the calendar events, the calendar. Here's personalization. So in the timeline personalization, on the bars, I can see, maybe I just want just list, no dependencies. You can do it grid only, timeline only, or combined. Here it's combined on the main view. So I'm showing the items with the grid. Here's an example of personalization where I want to add, as I've done before, next to the planning column, I want to add state. Right. So it tells me I can combine looking at those two items and see where things are. Right. Again, you can auto fit and fill and move and adjust on this one. Again, I'm looking at the main portfolio view here. Right. In a minute, we'll see all the other views that are possible here underneath the HR portfolio. Here you can see the colors. You can adjust the size. You can expand and contract 100%, 200%. Look at the colors, the legends. Again, this is look at the portfolio view. Now let's go look at the ones that are available. First one I'm going to look at is goals. So what are the goals related to this portfolio? And it looks like we have 3 main primary goals related to this portfolio that I've established, right? So automation, employee experience, and hybrid work management. And all these items have been assigned underneath one of those goals. It's possible that you have an unassigned item, and you would look at that, right? So under the goals, and I can now, if I expand and go out to the goals framework, I can actually see these goals. And I can look at the hierarchy of these goals and understand there is automation, employee experience, and hybrid work management. And what the sub-goal underneath it is. And these are actually setting out to be targets. All right, and there's a whole section on goals and goals framework and targets and all that. So this is the first view we looked at, which was goals. Now let's go look at the organization. So this is looking at the portfolio from an organization perspective. So we have finance, we have HR, right? We have business unit marketing, and underneath there we have departments. So things can belong into organization, business unit, and department. This is just kind of organizational dice and slice. Same thing. You're just looking at this with a different lens. Now let's look at the product view. If you're on a project to product transformation, this is terrific. If you have product set up in your instance, you can now see your full roadmap by product. So this is an example of looking at Acme Corporation, a particular product. It's in the application model. It's who's a manufacturer, what type it is, etc. All this has been set up. So now we have a complete view of product. So as a portfolio owner, I can look at how my portfolio is performing and any possibly unrelated items, if there are any items that have been classified, but look at it by product. Now let's move to strategic investments. If you've set up strategy, so you've set up strategic objectives and so forth, now you can link all of your items to these strategic priorities. And this is an example of employee experience. Right? So now you're linking this up to a business strategy. Besides goals, you are linking it to a business strategy, two primary ones that have identified: wellness and satisfaction, right? So this is how you look at items under strategic investments and where they fall. So again, you're just using another lens, this one's strategic lens. We'll look at that particular initiative itself, because this is strategy and initiative definitions. This is the hierarchy of the strategy side. Right? If you set this up in advance, you can link all these together and you can understand where every work item belongs within the full portfolio. Right? This is the HR portfolio, but you're looking at it from different lenses. Again, this is the strategy lens. Right now, let's look at the value stream lens. If you're interested in understanding the value stream, and here we have two: hire to retire. That's the main value stream. And we can look at the processes and we can look at the application models. And this is how you connect this. This is part of the CSDM architecture. Right? So now we're looking at the value streams and how things will line up for full value. And now we're back to the main one, which is the product portfolio, which is the actual HR, which is only one. That's how we set the lens up to start. That's the lens we picked. And when you look at this, you'll see all the related items. Under that portfolio, you have demands, projects, programs, risks, and issues. Individual items you can click into. You can look at the state, probability, the risk, issues. You can look at the cost plans, the benefits, non-monetary benefits. If you set portfolio targets, the financial targets, you can see those. And if you did any planning and budgeting, original planning and budgeting, it would show up there too. So this is the full view of portfolio, because that's the lens we started with at the very beginning when we created this portfolio. And as always, you can create demands and epics right from here if you choose projects too. Thank you. All right, so that's the hierarchy. So we were in the prioritization section. Now let's move on to the workspace, which is kind of the conclusion of, okay, I've done setup, I've done prioritization, I've put stuff on a roadmap, we got all that together. Now what does it look like when I'm actually in my roadmap? So we'll look at the personalization, we'll look at dependencies, and we'll look at the milestones. So let's first look at personalization. All right, so far we've talked about prioritization. Now let's look at some personalization of the application, right? So we're used to looking at prioritization screen. Now let's go to the roadmap. And this is a very basic setup of the roadmap with most activity turned off. You can see, you can expand and contract. You can go to the Kanban, right? So the roadmap has the timeline and Kanban both. Again, in the Kanban, you can configure the lanes, swim lanes. So go back to the roadmap. So this is where you personalize. You can do things, you can group by and color by. An example, I look at execution items and I want to see what prioritization. You can look at what the items are depending on how you color. All right, so I can see more information in the bars just by selecting, and you can put other information in the bars. I can see milestones, the actual roadmap milestones at the top, right? And we'll see in a minute here how to actually add milestones. And if you want to look at item milestones, these would be the planning item milestones, not the execution item milestones, right? And if you want to look at milestone only, you can get a milestone only view. And you also can get milestone labels. And then we get down to dependencies. If you want to view dependencies, right now there's no link to dependencies. You can click on dependencies and you'll see the notes, the little icons show up, which you can hover over. And then if you want to, you can add lines, right? So you can click on the lines and say, okay, I want to see the lines and relationships between these items. Right? Or only look at just items that have dependencies. Right? And you can also see the time where we are currently with the red bar. Right? So that's just a little bit of the little area of personalization. It can go into unscheduled demands. So this is unscheduled items and it's an unscheduled demand. So something's been put in that's fallen into the HR portfolio, but it doesn't have a date. You can see there's no date to it, so it's unscheduled. So you can go look at an unscheduled item and schedule it. You can put some dates in it, right? Here's an example of looking at a demand, some dependencies, right? You can look at information. I clicked on track mode. Once I click on track mode, I get a lot more information within the actual bar. And here's an example of me looking at dependencies within that actual item, right? You can create dependencies, you can adjust dependencies, etc. You can also move, drag and drop, drag and drop capability, move this stuff around, just like in a Kanban also. And now here you're instead moving the planning item in total, the bar versus a tile. Down here at the bottom is some information on using. It'll highlight items, right? Legends, etc. at the bottom down here. You can increase size too. You can zoom in, zoom out. Remember, this is the HR portfolio I created. That's the lens I started from. So when I look at the roadmap, I see the HR roadmap. Remember earlier we talked about in prioritization, the hierarchy view, where I can see all these related lenses. So I can see goals, product, etc. But remember, this lens, this roadmap view specifically is only going to show me portfolio because that's the lens I started with. So in other words, that's the lens that will show me the actual portfolio view. I can also do some sharing. If I want to share, I can, if we've seen before, I can share out and share this particular view with anybody. All right, attachments and the usual stuff. Export to PowerPoint's available too. If you have that set up, you can export to PowerPoint. Thank you. All right, so there's kind of a quick overview of personalization, right? So now let's step into dependencies and the different types of dependencies. There's a roadmap dependency, right? So we'll kind of go through all those different types. All right, let's start this video there. Now let's look at dependencies. So here I can highlight and activate view dependencies, view dependency lines, and I also have a way of looking at only dependencies, dependency items. So from dependencies, you can identify issues. As you see here, there's red. There's a conflict between the two. There's an overlap. You can see which items. You can drill into the items. You can look at the details of the items. And turn on track mode. Then they also tell, same thing. I can see % complete. I can see more information relating to the dependency. So it looks like HR workflow is on time, but it looks like it needs to end a little sooner, or we need to move out automation. Here's an example of an item where it's got two dependencies, and I'm going to add a dependency that is outside the HR roadmap. So you can add dependencies to other business units or portfolios, etc. Right? This is here I'm looking at a dependency to an executive portal that belongs in another portfolio. So on this map, you'll see two dependency lines. And if I go back and I look at the dependencies, you'll see that I have a dependency now to an external item. And this is the executive portal. If I click on that, I can actually go in and look at the executive portal. It's an Epic. It's not assigned to a portfolio right now. And it belongs under on our app customization, right? So I linked out to that. So if that person who owns that particular item, that execution item, it's possible that when they create a roadmap, they'll see my dependency. And it'll also show there's a conflict there, right? And, it also has, besides dependency, it has related items. You can have things that are related that are not dependent. So you can establish your relationships outside of being dependent, which are fix conflicts. And now we'll go look at, with the individual items, we'll look at how to turn off and look at only. So if I click this link here, I will now see dependent items only. So if you want to work with just dependent, this is it. Thank you. All right, so that's dependencies. The next one here we'll kick into is milestones and how you set up milestones and the different types of milestones. All right. Okay, let's look at milestones as a part of the personalization of the system. All right, so we're looking at roadmap milestones here. So these are the top level, created to represent, independent of the planning item, milestones for the roadmap itself. So here is an example, looking at the detail of HR funding when it kicked off. It was obviously achieved because it's green. So I also have one here red. This is a milestone that was not achieved. So you can mark these. These are future milestones. They're in black by default. They're set as future. Let's go add a milestone. Let's have, say, phase 2 launch. It's a key milestone event. So go to key milestones and we'll put in a date. So it's next year, right? So we're going to mark off in a way in the future what we have planned in terms of a major event, right? So these are the roadmap milestones. And then we can move on to individual milestones. So we look at milestones within the planning items. So here's an example of an epic, and I've created 2 milestones. You can look on the milestones. And you can see the individual testing and integration. And let's add a new milestone. Actually, and then let's make it a missed milestone, like testing complete. And we can actually note it as a missed milestone if we want. Again, I would assume this would have been put in the future, but let's just say it was a little behind. We're trying to make sure catch up. So this is an upcoming event, right? And I can say, hey, listen, we missed this milestone event. Right? Testing complete. So maybe it looks like we're going to quickly fall a little bit behind schedule on this epic. Right? So these are individual. If I go down a little further, I'm now down in project. And you'll see when I bring up project, milestones, I can't change them. I can't add and I can't change. That's because the milestones are being brought in via the integration directly from the project tasks. So if you identify milestone, key milestones on your project tasks, those will be brought in. I also can't create new milestones because we're using the execution record as the official milestone. Where, say, for Epic or something like that, we can actually create our own milestones demand. You can also go here and see where I can turn it on and off. I can see roadmap on or off. I can have individual item milestones on or off. I can add labels on or off. All right, so you can personalize this a lot. Right, milestone only view too. You can also set it where the roadmap shows only the milestone items. So I can plan anything as a milestone in it. Okay. Thank you. All right. This brings us now off to the goal, right? We talked a lot about the goal framework, really. So we talked a lot about alignment of work up to strategy, right? Business strategy. And a way to connect this and see if you're tracking to those objectives is with the goal framework. You can establish goals in almost any one of these layers, strategy layer, portfolio layer, many layers you can establish goals, and you can also establish related targets. And you could have nested goals too, and targets. So you can actually begin to track. You can set the goals and you can start to track it. So you can start to see your progress against a strategic objective. Right, so let's go look at the final video here on goals.
Goal framework for strategic portfolio management. Let's revisit what goal and target mean. Goals are specific, measurable objectives that an organization aims to achieve over a specific time period. Goals should be quantitative, ambitious, and motivational. Targets track and measure the progress of a goal. Goals and OKRs are primary ways for leaders to set strategy. If our strategy remains in Excel, PowerPoint, Word, or SharePoint, we cannot get a real-time view of how our work is contributing to these goals. By leveraging Goal Framework for strategic portfolio management, we are able to ensure work is associated to goals and progress is tracked in real time. And any strategy shifts, everyone can stay informed. This is the current architecture for the goal framework for SPW. It all starts with the strategic plan, which encompasses the vision, mission, and core values of the organization. The strategic plan relies on the strategic priorities to define what the organization will focus on to operationalize the strategic plan and align with the goals. The goals define the measurable objectives that an organization aims to achieve over a specific period. The targets quantify the progress and assess whether or not the goals have been met. The work items are the demands, projects, and epics an organization executes to reach that vision and mission. We also have sub-goals with targets. There are 3 simple steps to align goals with planned work. First, you create the defined goal with specific dates, owners, and aligned to a strategic priority. Next, you set the target for the goal, define the metrics to be tracked, and assign an owner. Last, you align the goal to planned work, the project, the epic, the demand. You will want to be logged in as the Goal Framework user or an SPW user. We're logged in as Megan Burke. Let's open the Strategic Planning Workspace. Click Workspace, Strategic Planning Workspace. We're going to review the goals for the sales portfolio. The Goals Overview tab, there are a few widgets here that show us the current goal, the status of those goals, the work that are aligned, if there are target due dates, and if there are insights. We can also look at the goals in the hierarchical view. This view shows us that there are sub-goals or targets aligned to a goal. By clicking the ellipse, you can create a sub-goal, a target, align to work, or delete the goal. Let's now create a new goal. To create a new goal, you will want to enter the name, the owner, the start, and the end date. This is already tied to the entity of portfolio and the portfolio sales. We'll also want to add a strategic priority. Click Save. Now you will see the new goal in the hierarchical view as well as in the overview. Let's create a target for this goal. For the target, you'll need to add a name. You'll see it's already related to the goal. The owner, Jake Elliott, the start date and the end date come from the goal. The unit of measure will be number. It will be maximum. This will be for 85 is the value and 100 is what we want for logos. Click Save. You will now see that we have a target under our goal. Let's now align work. In the goals detail view, you will see the target and click aligned item. Click add. We are going to have a project. The project name, it will be brand awareness. Click save. In the overview tab, you will now see we have aligned work to our goal. In our goals detail, we have the detail of the goal, the target of the goal, and the planned work.
All right, so that brings us to the end of the demonstration, SPW for 2.1. So let's now step into a quick conversation here before we wrap it up with Q&A on some kind of leading practices for SPW, right? So one and first and foremost is because you're structuring SPW, it's very important to understand from a system administrator perspective that there's multiple update sets that will be needed to use because you have multiple application scopes. So that's the first thing from a sysadmin perspective. So your administrator needs to know several update sets to manage this, all of these different, the integrations, the core tables, planning tables. So the lens structure, right? Recommended, of course, is just best practice to use the out-of-the-box lenses or get very familiar with the lenses, the lens structure and integrations before you just decide to establish and create your own new lens. When I mean new lens, it's not creating a new roadmap, it's creating a new lens. So you need to know the bottom structures and hierarchies and integrations, things like that. For the users too, right? Of course, be sure to understand what the role they're going to play, what you share, if they can view a roadmap that you share, or they can edit the roadmap that you share, depending on how you give them access. So understand if you give them a share and they can edit, they can make changes and deprioritize and make changes. So just understand how that works. And also another key one too is every customer is, of course, going to have their own particular fields. We ran with an out-of-the-box demonstration of fields, but you're always going to have some unique fields, and you're going to want to bring those onto the planning records. So understand how that works too, how you configure your own custom fields, bring them to the integration and get them available. And you have to do view setups, right? You need to make sure those are available in the views too. So there's kind of a custom fields and a setup, how to properly map and how to set up the views. And the filtering too, most important too, is sometimes we'll hear customers say, I set everything up, but I don't have any data. Probably more than likely it has to do with the filtering. So when you set it up, your integration filtering and then your portfolio filtering, depending on which one is causing a problem, right? And finally, too, make sure when you do testing, don't bring in everything into your environment. You know, you have thousands of demands and then thousands of projects. Use a limited data set for testing just to make sure that you know what you're looking at. Again, I mentioned the views here. Make sure you're configuring the views properly if you're adding new elements. So there's original APWs, there's new and preview. Because preview is like you click on the box, the bar, and it shows up the preview. If you go into the detail, it looks like the default. So make sure you understand how to manage the views properly, right? And if you upgrade, right, make sure you follow your recommendations. If you are on San Diego and need to upgrade to Tokyo and beyond, there's a migration set here, number D. It tells you how to do that migration for the goal framework. But make sure you just look at the documentation because there's a lot of enhancements and features being added. So that quickly brings me to the end because I want to make sure we open this up for Q&A. And I guess, Molly, if we have any questions we want to that haven't been answered or we want to bring up.
Yeah, there's only one question, and it's from Paula. Well, actually, it's a comment from her, and thank you. She talks about there are some quick tip that checking out the dependencies on the plugin, and she had some issues with prod when she installed in prod versus a sub prod. So there may be, and I just wanted to answer this, there may be issues between installing in a sub prod versus a prod. Maybe the reason is in sub prod, you're able to install any plugin you want in order to test it out. And we don't check licenses there. But once you request the plugin from the store, we validate in our internal instance that you have an entitlement record for that particular plugin. And yes, there has been some issues with that, but I don't know what, you know, and if you have that, then the best thing to do is to do what Paula did, was to open up a support case and they can help you out.
So Mike, that's an example of where you're licensed as portfolio like standard, right? SPW standard, and you've loaded it into subdev and you're testing it all out. And then you go to production and you're only entitled to a smaller subset of the functionality, right? That's probably the use case that could happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's probably a licensing thing, as you mentioned. All right. Any other questions that came up that we might be able to answer online?
None so far.
Okay.
One I would like to just talk about is we have some we have roles, right, for SPW and for goals, and there is a APW read-only role. That role is not to be given out to anybody. The reason for that is that's our internal role that we use in order to conduct our licensing, okay, along with other roles. So we ask that there's the business stakeholder role or there's the goal framework read-only role. Those are the ones that you want to add to your groups.
Oh, thank you, Molly. Just want to mention here before we wrap it up too, that there's an SPM Evangelists. If you're interested in this program, this QR code up here, I'll leave it up for a minute if you have your phone open. You can select that QR code. If you're interested in becoming a member of the advisory program, the customer advisory program at the Evangelists, and there's lots of different types of contribution, from simple contributions and helping us design product, review product, to, being at knowledge or being a reference customer, right? There's lots of different types of activities. So we recommend if you're interested, that to sign up for the program. And finally, too, I hope that we are able to answer all your questions, right? So that was kind of back to the challenge at the beginning. Are you comfortable with, how to drive it, with the strategies about it, the key concepts like the lenses, integrations, prioritizations, right? The goals, right? And the leading practices, right? And then here it's really, like you said, it's hopefully we've accomplished what our objective, which is you understand the capabilities, you understand what's required to deploy, and also is really important is how to communicate to your own stakeholders internally in your organization of how this might benefit you, what the value is, and then where to get started, right? And then finally, at the end of this, there'll be a section link. It's in community. It's called SPW. It's called Getting Started, right? It's a Getting Started kit. There's a whole section on process guides, implementation guides, terminology. There's videos, learning courses, the capability maps out there. That's an interactive capability map, by the way. You can drill down, and books and briefs and things like that. So there's a whole section of resources to help you get started on saying, hey, let's put the plug in, let's test it, and let's get started. So that brings me to the end. And if no more questions, I want to thank everybody for attending today, and I look forward to future events.
That there seems to be a few of them.
Questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the one is will we be sharing this PowerPoint? And the answer is yes, we will. Yep. And please, can you have the QR code back on the screen before you sign off?
There you go. Yep.
And
there's a QR code.
Answer one more question from Paula before we go. There we go. And put this in. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending. And this brings us to the conclusion. Thank you.
Take care. Heightened, there